There's something to talk about from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We have a full room today to talk about the Japanese Exclusion Memorial and what plans are in place for it. I want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, specifically the people of the clear salt water who have been living on the water of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We are learning from their stewardship of these lands and waters, and we appreciate their hospitality. Also, something to talk about is sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which offers assisted and independent living, along with a vibrant memory care community, and is located on Rolling Bay. They also have day stay and respite care programs. If you'd like to learn more, call 206-206-594-1010 or check out the website at fieldstonecommunities.com. And today we are meeting online, but also in the conference room at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. And Ann Lovejoy is with us with Ellen Sato Faust and Lilly Kodama. So Ann, would you like to do a little bit of an introduction? And I'm sure that Ellen and Lilly will take it from there.
I'm sure they will. Thank you, Reed. I think for a lot of people who have come to the island more recently, the historic story of things that have happened here is not as well known as it might be. And while many people are aware of the Exclusion Memorial, I think that the biggest part of the story is really about community. So it's about both exclusion and incarceration and welcoming back and community that was holding the people in the camps during the exclusion period. And we are so blessed to have Lilly Kodama, who we mercilessly asked to tell her story over and over and over, but it's such a compelling story. And I think for a lot of us, learning from books is one thing, but learning from somebody's life experience is an entirely different thing. And you've had kids say things to you like, Lilly, you're a historic artifact, right? I mean, it's true, right? So we have this historic treasure right here. That doesn't mean you can't have your own experience of going, and I hope you will, go to tour the Exclusion Memorial. And we also have a film that the link is posted on the website and that we made with Lilly last year. That's about a little hour and a half or so of amazing stories, and it's well worth listening to. But I was just hoping that for those of us who maybe don't know the story as well, you could just kind of fill us in a little about what happened. Just to you as a family,
Well, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, then President Roosevelt issued an executive order on February 19th, and he mandated that all persons of Japanese descent had to be moved away from the West Coast. And for some reason, Bainbridge Island community was the very, do you want me to hold this? Sure. Okay. The Bainbridge Island community was the very first group to be excluded under this executive order. I mean, this was a small community of 276 people, and there were a larger population in places like Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles. And why did they choose a small community of 276 people? And nobody knows the exact reason, but probably the main reason was because on the island was Fort Ward left over from World War I, and there was a secret government operation going on there, and they were training people to intercept signals from Japan that were able to come here via a radio tower that was left over from World War I. It was a tower tall enough that was, I think someone said, several hundred feet taller than the Space Needle. But anyway, these people were being trained at Fort Ward, and that's probably the main reason. But another reason was, well, there was a Bremerton shipyard and naval base, and Boeing was across the way. And another reason was the government knew there were 110,000 people of Japanese descent living on the West Coast. And they're going to imprison 110,000 people, but where to put them?
Reporting in progress.
Anyway, anyway, they did have a small place, army base in Manzanar, which is in the Southern California near the Mojave Desert. And it had a few barracks that could accommodate we prisoners. And that's probably one of the main reasons they chose a small community. And there was an advantage to being the first to be taken away. And one advantage was that we went to this place in Manzanar, California, into barracks, whereas people in the larger communities, they had to be placed temporarily into places like the Puyallup Fairgrounds, where they converted the animal stalls into rooms. I think in California, they converted the Santa Anita racetracks, the same kind of situation. There were animal stalls that were made into rooms, but we went directly into barracks, which wasn't anything great, but it was a whole lot better than those converted animal stalls. But the other advantage was, since we were the very first, we got a whole lot of press coverage and so lots of authentic documentation of what happened. And that's why we have photos like you have exhibited here. And they're from the original newspaper coverage, and the original pictures are at the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle today. But anyway, and the other story about Bainbridge Island is that all up and down the West Coast, even nationally, all the newspapers and politicians were clamoring to get the Japs out. Whereas on Bainbridge Island, the newspaper and the community did not agree with that. And so it was unusual because this community wasn't a perfect place. There were still people here that supported that idea too, but the majority did not look at us at our community as possible traitors or espionage people, and they that made a big difference. And the other reason for that too is that they welcomed us back when the war ended. They said that the largest percentage of people returning to their homes was Bainbridge Island, because in other communities they even passed ordinances prohibiting that even after the war ended. And this memorial that we have on the island was millions of dollars. And you think about it, this is a small community. At that time, I don't think there were even 20,000 people when this memorial was finally completed. It cost millions of dollars. And I remember I had grown up here. I was born here on the island, went away to school, got married, and lived off the island. And when we finally moved back, I went to a meeting of the Japanese community, and they were talking about raising millions of dollars. And I was a skeptic. I thought, how can this? There weren't 276 people lived on the island. I knew that. We're a smaller group. And I thought, how can we even begin to raise that kind of money? But see, here it is. And it's because it wasn't just the Japanese Americans, it was the entire community that supported us. And it's really telling, and it wasn't just people donated things pro bono. The entire memorial was designed by Jean-Paul Jones, who is a renowned architect, and he has donated all his time. And we had Corps of Engineers who donated his time when he had to take care of the wetlands. I could go on, and there was donations from the legislatures. Our representatives supported us. And so here we go to the memorial, and it's there, and I still just get shaky when I see it, because here I didn't think we could even get that done, and here it is. And it says a whole lot about community and how with the small community and people knew each other, and they weren't so quick to believe the wartime propagandizing that went on.
The power of neighbors.
Yes.
Getting to know each other.
Right. Well, there's always good and bad, no matter what community you're in, what group you're in, what ethnicity, what religion, what family. It just says a lot about Bainbridge Island and the community it has, because it still goes on today.
Well, that's definitely true. Ellen, you had something to show us, I think. Do you want to talk a little about your,
Hi, I'm Ellen Sato Faust, and I am the Executive Director for the Bainbridge Island Japanese American Exclusion Memorial Association. A very long name. That's my day job right now, but my interest in this project, I'm fairly new to the island, although each year it's less and less true. I've been here for 11 years. My father was incarcerated at Tule Lake and was originally from Tacoma, Washington. And I cannot tell you how different the stories of community are depending on where you came from. Where she quotes 50% maybe came back here. I've read the academic studies say about 17% of incarcerees came back to Tacoma. And if you've ever been there, there used to be an extensive Japantown. It is completely erased off the map from downtown Tacoma. So I have a deep appreciation for the community here and what enabled people to come back and thrive with their lives back on the island. When I'm not actually doing my day job, I am a fangirl, I am a groupie, I am a supporter, I'm hero support for Lilly because we do tours together quite often.
Yeah.
And so just like you, I'm a student of learning the story here on Bainbridge Island. How many people are like lifetime Bainbridge Islanders in this room? Oh, good, too. And then how many have been here since the beginning of the memorial back in the late 1990s, early 2000s? Okay, good. I'm gonna fly through kind of a history. This is just another demonstration of community, like Lilly was saying. And I'm just going to fly through the development of how the memorial came to be what it is today and what it's going to be tomorrow. And let's see if I can do this right.
and then we'll take questions.
So let me share my screen and let me get you that. If you've been to the memorial, this is where you turn left. Even though I said right this way, it's actually left that way when you turn in off of Eagle Harbor Drive. And this was in the mid 2000s when they were installing some of the interpretive work. And I won't bore you with that, but this is a quick walk through and we'll see all the features that are at the memorial today. When you first walk in, you see this interpretive sign, and this is a photo. We always point out Lilly. She's actually in this photo walking down the boardwalk to the ferry to get on the ferry to Seattle on March 30th, 1942. Last year we did about 85 private tours. We get people from all over the world, quite literally, who come a range of time. And there've been groups of a couple from Arizona up to 75 second graders from the area. And we've got a lot of international visitors as well. So we start our tour there, and then you see the fabulous Ranger trailer, which is someday going to be in stark contrast to what you see next, which is the visitor center is going to be in this general location. If you don't know it, the memorial is an administrative unit of the National Park Service's Minidoka National Historic Site in Idaho. So we have the support of the National Park Service. And Jenny Burbank is our permanent ranger. She started back on site on Saturday, and she will be on site until November on Wednesday through Sunday, most days. So if you do not have a private tour, you have a private Jenny.
I forgot to mention that we started out in Manzanar, but we transferred to Minidoka before the year was over. And so we spent the majority of our time in Minidoka, and that's why we're part of the Minidoka Historic Site rather than Manzanar.
Isn't that interesting that they let you move? You're a prisoner basically, but they let you move. That happened to my family too. They went from Tule Lake to Minidoka. This is our pavilion, which was one of those community stories, was built back in 2008 by a group called the Timber Framers Guild. John Boudet, who is a timber framer, is still on our board to this day and has been working on this project with us all of these years. But the timber framers came and in a matter of days raised this building, our first structure on site, to practice their craft. And that was all done by volunteer work. In 2011, the main feature that you see today, the memorial wall, was built and dedicated. Midoto Nayoni is our motto, let it not happen again. And that is the point of the memorial. And this was all designed, as she mentioned, by John Paul Jones. This is our memorial wall. It's 276 feet long, 1 foot for each person who resided on Bainbridge Island back in March 30th, 1942. The artwork on there was done by a gentleman by the name of Stephen Gardner. And if you've ever paid close attention, if you visited, there's a quote on each one. And that quote is taken from an oral history project, which is so precious because a lot of the people who contributed their stories in first person are no longer with us today, but their words continue to inspire this story. It's not moving. 2018, some of the interpretive work was there, and it's kind of mimics what you see across the back of the room to give our visitors a sense of the history from before, well before the war. I mean, the Japanese community started developing in about 1883. So by 1942, some people had been here for 60 years. It wasn't as if they all just got off the boat and were taken away as new immigrants. So that entire story is kind of illustrated through these interpretive panels. Along with that, there are interpretive waysides that you can read as you go down to the lower level. And here we have the historic Eagledale ferry dock. Again, this is a photo of people coming down actually to board the ferry to leave the island that day. Unfortunately, we couldn't recreate that dock, but we have recreated a deck at the exact location where that old dock existed. Was anybody here back in the day when the Eagledale dock was actually, well, Clay, you probably built it and Reed, right? So yeah, this used to actually go down to the water and you could catch the ferry either on the Winslow side or it would come across and pick you up at the Eagledale side. So we have installed this interpretive deck, which gives you a view of exactly what they saw as they went to board the ferry. The deck was dedicated in 2021. And in 2022, this rather fabulous art installation went in. I had nothing to do with it. Steve did. He was on the committee. We did an RFP and these wonderful artists who are fairly local. I think they're from Long Branch or somewhere out on the Key Peninsula. A couple, one specializing in the art of paper cut, where you make the little black piece of paper and you cut it out with tiny scissors and make like a shadow figure. She took that art and it became a life-size version. If you see the figures on the departure deck, and she took a lot of the symbols from the story, the tags that everybody had to wear. Once your family registered to go, you got a number and a tag. So whenever you see photos of people, every baby's wearing a tag, every suitcase has a tag, every person has a tag. And the way she tells it, once you were tagged with your number, you no longer really cease to be a human. You were just a number. So she was really fascinated with that aspect of the symbolism. And so that repeats throughout. So if you haven't visited, please do. People really enjoy the artwork. It is now in the process of being evaluated for an International Public Art Award. So it's really gotten recognition at an international level. So that's what we have today. And like I said, we hold the commemoration, which will be March 30th. You're all invited to come. It's 11 o'clock. And we hear speakers. This year's theme will be Teach the Children. And it's about passing stories on to the next generation to preserve them. We also, like I said, do a lot of tours, and it's tours, businesses come. We had Mitsubishi USA bring their entire Seattle office. We had Joint Base Lewis McChord come. It was a group of actually clergymen who counsel soldiers and to be more sensitive of other cultures when we're overseas. And Leadership Kitsap is again coming this year. And we've had the most fabulous international groups. We had, there's an organization called Foundation for the International Understanding Through Students, and they've brought probably a half a dozen groups. One of them was Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Russia, These are the best of the best, the brightest of some of the university students who qualified for this program in their country. And they are touring this as a model of how the United States, I think, shows compassion, forgiveness, recognition of this event in their history. And I think a lot of them are amazed that a government would actually admit that there was a mistake made. So I learned so much every time these. We also had actually I should go back. We also had the museologist from the Holodomor Museum in Kyiv, Ukraine, come through shortly after the war broke out. So it was a while ago. It's just fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time. So community, your friends and neighbors, you might recognize them, bring their friends to the memorial. And you're, like I said, you're welcome to sign up for a private tour. But getting to today, just to talk a little bit about it, this final phase after 20 plus years of the community helping to build out the memorial, like Lily said, hard to imagine that such a grand thing could have been built, but with the help of the community, we're finishing the final phase. It was planned as a series. It was planned as the wall and the departure deck and the visitor center. So this is the final piece. It's originally budgeted at 4 million. There's a couple little things that might push it a little bit higher. But as of today, we had a really great end of year push and the community was very generous. But we've secured 2.8 million of that and planned to break ground this year. Our building permit application is with the city of Bainbridge Island right now. And we still anticipate to get started within the coming months.
That's pretty amazing. Getting a limp permit that fast.
Oh, I don't know how fast that'll be. It hasn't been issued yet. Here's the site plan, and just for the people who are here in the room, this is the existing parking lot and entrance. This is where the trailer, where the National Park Service Ranger sits is. So this whole area will be cut back into the hillside there. The visitor center itself is about 1,300 square feet, so not huge, but there'll be a little office space there, and there'll be indoor area. These tour groups especially, we really suffer. We go out rain or shine and it's cold.
Yeah.
And especially some of the students come so well prepared from school, but they don't even have a place to sit down out of the rain and discuss what they learned. So over that indoor space, there will be an outdoor amphitheater with some exterior sitting space for groups. And the entire upper part will be paved with pavers, which I think is really important because we have a lot of visitors from senior centers, other places where not everybody's able to navigate gravel with a wheelchair or with a walker. So we're looking forward to that. There's just more of the floor plan. You can take a look afterwards. And this is approximately what we're aiming for. And that's our aerial view. So that's what I wanted to tell you, to just catch you up on where we are, and happy to answer your questions later.
That is so exciting to come from, as you said. I remember two stories you've told that really, really sing out to me. And one is about a household appliance that was delivered to your family in the camp. Wasn't it?
What?
Didn't somebody bring you a washing machine?
Yes.
Wasn't that somebody's relative?
Oh, it was Felix Nardi's father, Felix Senior. When our family had to leave our property, then my parents asked the Filipino men who worked for my family to move into our farmhouse and look after the farmhouse and take care of our farm, and they did. And while they were there, then and they were more than farmhands. To me, they were my babysitters, or they were part of the family. In fact, our house is around the corner from Bainbridge Gardens, and in those days at Bainbridge Gardens there was a grocery store, and I remember either Felix or Euladio said, Mama, we're taking Lily to the store. And I remember my mama saying, don't buy her any candy or ice cream. And when we come back, then one of them was holding me in their arms, but I had an ice cream bar. And they lived in the Filipino house. And I loved going to the Filipino house, and I made sure I went there at lunchtime because then I could eat food with them. And I just loved to see them and go there for lunch because not only was their food good, but they were eating with their fingers and hands. And I thought that was something special too. Anyway, so they did look after our home, and Felix Senior learned that here, my baby sister was, I didn't say, but at that time I was 7 years old. My sister was 5. My little brother was 2.5, and my baby sister was only 9 months old. And so here my mama had 4 children, and when they got to the camps, they didn't have washing machines, so they were washing clothes by hand. And here all the mamas were washing diapers by hand. And Felix put my mother's electric washing machine on the back of the pickup truck, and he drove all that way to camp to deliver mama's electric washing machine. And it was the days before freeways. And someone asked me, wasn't there gasoline rationing? But farmers didn't have rationing back then. And Felix used the farm gasoline and the pickup truck and drove all that way with a washing machine. Because my mama was not the only one with a baby with diapers. And so that was pretty special. And so that was the other thing about, I mean, I just took it for granted because the Nardis were the only ones who looked after the Japanese farmers. Many of the Japanese farmers had Filipino men working for them, and others looked after their farms too. And so there was this connection, and, I didn't realize it. It didn't even hit me until years later that I thought, oh, there's no love lost between Filipinos and Japanese because of the Bataan Death March. That didn't even enter my head. And so it says so much about community and getting to know each other, and how much goes on propaganda-wise during wartime. I think all countries do that to make the enemies not quite human, and you have to make the enemies bad so that it's not so hard to shoot and kill. I think anyway, war is terrible.
The other story that I love so much is about the crows and the ravens.
Well, every March 30th, we do have an event at the site because that's the day we were removed from the island. I think it was the 60th anniversary, and this was well before the wall was built. It wasn't even, the land was not even cleared.
There was a platform, right?
Well, it was, that year was when, I should start out by saying the idea for this memorial actually started from the Interfaith Council of Churches of Kitsap County. And they approached the Bainbridge Island community and said, don't you think there should be a plaque or something commemorating what happened? And so they suggested placing it at the Winslow Ferry Dock. And then our community said, well, that isn't where we were taken away. We were taken away from the Eagledale site. And so that's where a stone plaque was designed and was going to be placed at the Eagledale site. But this is, as I said, this was well before it was cleared. It was still blackberries and alder trees. But there was a clearing at the very beginning, so that the stone commemorating what happened was placed there, and it was a part of this big event for March 30th. And so it was a big to-do. There was a big platform. There were state legislatures. I think Governor Locke was there. And there were speeches and speeches because of all these politicians there, but there were all the television stations were there to record all this. And Clarence Moriwaki was the president and the MC. And so after all the speeches and the last event was this young man, Ken Matsudara, was going to read all the names of every Japanese person on the island at the time. And there was going to be a moment of silence after he read every name. And so when he started to read the names, this murder is the
Go for it.
murder of crows approached overhead and started cawing so loudly you could hardly hear the names being read. And and Clarence was worried because of the silence, that moment of silence, and that was supposed to be the very end of the ceremony. But when the last name was read, the crows flew away. And that was the end of the ceremony. And so then everybody's milling around it because there was a platform up there and we were all sitting in folding chairs, and there was quite a group of community there. But anyway, so people were milling around, and and then I said the other people who were invited were all the representatives of all the churches. So there were the Presbyterian minister, the Methodist, the Buddhist priest, there was a Jewish rabbi, there were tribal elders were there. Every denomination was represented. And so anyway, this tribal elder approached Clarence and said, that was the most amazing thing about the crows. And he said, what do you mean? They were so loud you couldn't hear the names being read. And she said, you don't understand. In our culture, crows and ravens are thought to be the spirits of our departed and our ancestors. And see, many of the names that were being read were people who had already passed away.
It's like they carry the names, they carry
Right.
the spirits.
And so many times when I am out there doing tours, or sometimes when I'm just there, a crow or crows will fly by. And so I've done a whole about face about crows. My whole family now, I collect crows, and so I think every birthday card has a crow on it. But anyway, that's my crow story. So that truly is remarkable because I've told this story many times, and others have told me stories that,
Yeah, back it up.
back it up.
And didn't Clarence check with all the TV
Oh, he
stations?
did. He heard this, when he heard this from this, he decided to, since all the television stations had filmed the event, he called every one of them to see the entire, they do outtakes, and every station let him see the entire filming. And he said the only time those crows are cawing is when the names are being read.
It gives you a different idea, doesn't it, about crows and
Well, it just,
community.
it tells about that place because here is, if you've been there and you see this wonderful memorial wall. On the first Halloween, we were all kind of nervous because here's this wonderful wall and there's no gate. It's open 24/7. It's been 20 years now that it's been up. There hasn't been any kind of stark vandalism at all. It's really pretty remarkable. It's a wall that's, I knock on wood.
Yeah.
Nothing's happened yet.
So has anyone got a question or a story or?
I have two things. First of all, who makes all the brains now?
They just show up.
They just show up.
Right, well, at the first 30th, March 30th, big commemoration, then John Boudet, who Ellen mentioned, his wife made 1,000 cranes. And for that event, and it was the very first one, she passed out these strings of cranes, and everyone who was there was handed one, and we all went down there and hung it on the pegs that John Paul Jones added to the wall. And so for some reason, people assumed that that's the only thing that should go on there, which was never stipulated and not ever said, but from that assumption, people just started bringing cranes. And so, and school groups have made them, and Yeah.
My hair cutter, who I haven't seen for a long time, told me a story about taking his 6-year-old there. And when she saw the cranes, she made her dad go back to the car and get on YouTube and learn how to fold them, and took a map that they had in the car and cut up squares and went and made some and brought them back. Because she said, I want to put those.
Right, it's fitting because the cranes started in Hiroshima and it stands for peace. And there's this whole story about how it originated. And so it's really pretty fitting that it is there. And so, I mean, it's remarkable because, so now every March 30th, we do place cranes there, don't we?
Yeah.
But anyone could place anything they want to, but we'll go there at different times and there'll be a whole group of new cranes that people have brought and placed, and so it's really remarkable.
Kind of like little prayer flags.
Mhm.
And if you can kind of repeat a little bit before somebody answers, that would help for the people online.
Did you have another question? I think.
Well, I want to comment, so the newspaper is which you said supported the Japanese, and I know that the editor and his wife, that their daughter wrote a book
Right.
about that, and I can't remember what the name is, but you have it in the library.
In Defense of Our Neighbors.
Pardon me?
In Defense of Our
In
Neighbors.
defense of our.
Yeah, by Mary Woodward.
It's available.
It's available from me, if you don't have a copy.
Yeah, Reed Hanson, I was in the 6th grade when the internment took place. And I think Lily, you were maybe about the 1st grade starting school then, weren't you?
Pardon me?
You were about in the 1st grade then?
I was 7, so I was in the 2nd grade.
Yeah. Anyway, I remember it well and been with my friends through grade school, and when they left, they would, if the high school kids got to go down to the dock to see our friends off, but 6th graders weren't to be trusted. So we didn't get to go down. Anyway, I remember it very well.
There was another.
When you were in the camps, how did you survive as far as food? Was that all provided for you, and clothing and toys and?
The food was,
Yeah. So was food and clothing and toys, were those things provided in the camps?
well, yeah, food was provided as I said, we were the very first group there. And so at very first it was Army fare. And so I always tell this story too, that I was reminded of how it was when I saw the film Les Miserables and I saw the children lined up and the food was placed in, and that's how I remember our first, we had to go to the mess hall for our food, and they separated the children from the adults for some reason. But anyway, I was all excited because they passed out these metal discs, and you open it up when it was a plate and there was a handle and it had a little round metal disc, and opened up, that was a cup. And as I said, I was just 7, and they had little spoons and forks and knife in the side of there. And so he held that out, and plop went some potatoes, and then plop went, and I thought, oh, those are baby weenies. Was Vienna sausage out of the can. And then plop went this glob of gooey, olive green, gooey stuff. Anyway, we all sat at the table, and in those days, children had to clean their plates, right? You had to eat everything. And so I didn't mind the potatoes, and the baby weenies were okay. But when I took one bite of that gooey green stuff, I didn't like it. And it was canned spinach, and we never had canned spinach. And so I didn't want to eat that. I had to. And so I was prompted by everybody, oh, just think of Popeye, you'll be strong. And that's what I remember about food there at the beginning. But eventually, the internees planted their own vegetables, and then people became cooks. They found their own cooks, and so food improved. And but at first it was, I think, Kay Sakai, who was 22 at the time. I don't know if you remember her, but she was 22 at the time, and she'd give tell stories too, and it was a whole different story from a 22-year-old and a 7-year-old. But she said she remembers her mother getting fed with mutton, and that was part of the affair, and they never eaten mutton. And so she didn't like that. And I remember my mother telling the story that one elderly woman said, people got diarrhea because some of the food was so unusual and unknown to them. And this one elderly woman said to my mother, they're trying to poison us slowly and we're gonna all die. But food did improve eventually, so. But at first they did feed us. And as far as clothing, I tell school kids that the Sears Roebuck catalog was the Amazon of the day. And that's where they ordered things. And I remember at Christmas time making X's over whatever I wanted for Christmas. And that's how we got things.
And people sewed too.
And people sold,
We've been to the Minidoka site before and just it seemed like I remember they had a lot of, I wonder how many families they put in your cabin, because it seemed like they kind of crammed people together.
Well,
So she's saying how many families were in a cabin? Quite a few sometimes.
well, I don't remember our address in Manzanar, but our address in Minidoka was block 44 and the block was 44 and the barrack was 48, block 8. I mean, barrack 8 and our room was E. And so there must have been, and that was, I think, towards the A, B, C, D, E. And so there were 5 units in one barrack. And each unit was, what did they say, about 10 by 10 or
I thought it was
20 by, oh, not 10 by 10, but I mean, it was a good size, maybe about this size, maybe smaller than this room. But anyway, one family per room.
One family, if you had 5 kids.
And it didn't matter how many children you had the same size room and all it had was one stove and that's it. And army cuts, metal.
You did have a cot, you say?
We had cots. Yeah, it was with spring but the mattresses were filled with straw.
Ah, and those army blankets, did you have those
Army
horrible
blankets,
itchy army blankets?
Right, and then the barracks were made with green lumber, and so with the heat, they shrank, and so the outside walls had tar paper, but the floors didn't, and so there were gaps in it. And that's when I also went on our Costa Rica trip. And remember when we went and they told us to be sure to look in our shoes before we put them on in case there are scorpions in there?
Yes.
Well, see, that made me remember how it was in the camps, because they could also come up through the cracks in the floors. So that was the other thing. We, with children, it was fun and games for me at first because I had playmates right next door. I mean, when you grow up on a farm, your neighbors are still 2 or 3 miles away. And the only time we had play dates, it was recess at school. But here I had playmates and we played, we didn't have school right away. And so we had play day every day and we played hopscotch. It was easy to make marks in the sand and we played hide and seek. That was the most fun. And the best place to hide was under the barracks. But then our mothers gathered us together and said, do not hide under the barracks because there are rattlesnakes and scorpions under there. And if either one of them bite you, you can die. See, we don't have rattlesnakes or scorpions here. And so it was a whole different climate and thing. And so, well, and then the windstorms came and the sand came up through the cracks. And so you could wake up in the morning just all covered with sand. And it was but Mama was with us. And as long as Mama's with you, you can withstand almost anything. It depends on the mother you have. Except today you hear about these encampment places at the border where they're separating children from their parents. And I think, how can grown-up adults in America even think of doing that? And it's so hard for me to understand that, but at least we had our mamas with us and they tried their darndest to make life as normal as possible. And so then I could say it was fun and games, actually, most of the time, although it wasn't really all the time, but it was okay because, as I said, we had our mamas. And
When did school start, Lily? When did you,
Well-
how did that work?
When did school start?
for us, I know we didn't have school while we were in Manzanar, but then we did have school when we got to Minidoka. And so, and I was in second grade. And I think we didn't suffer any shortage or, damage. Either that or we were smart enough because when we came back to school here, we didn't have to repeat our classes or anything. But, we had Dick and Jane storybooks and that sort of thing. And schools were in a barracks. And I remember we had wooden chairs. But I remember hearing teenagers talk about their time, and they were high school students, and they suffered more than us grade schoolers, because I heard one person say they learned to type on paper, and then students said in chemistry lab they didn't have equipment that you would normally have, and so the high schoolers suffered more. But I think there were internees who were teachers to begin, who were teachers, but many of the teachers were from outside of the camp. And I do remember my teachers, one was Miss Schmidt and one was Miss Dubois. And Miss Schmidt made arrangements to take our class out of the camps to Twin Falls, which is the nearest town. And she gave us each a dime, and she took us to a dime store. So we each could buy one toy. Just think, a dime for a toy. That was pretty special. But the best part was she took us to a drugstore, and we each got to have ice cream sodas. And so I remember that trip, and that was Miss Schmidt. So I've never forgotten her. I remember that more than learning to read.
But as a kid, that meant a lot.
Well, it was pretty special. She took the whole class. She did that. So as I said, there was always good people. And
Just for reference, they were in Manzanar for 11 months. So no school for that first year.
as I said, we were the first ones there. And then eventually, as they built more and more barracks, then that they had enough to have the Los Angeles people of Japanese descent move into Manzanar.
Seems like the other thing I remember about Minidoka is it's out in the desert, so it must have been freezing cold in the winter and very hot in the summer.
Exactly.
And I assume you didn't have air conditioning.
She's saying Manzanar must have been very hot and cold.
It's Minidoka.
In Minidoka, excuse me.
Well, yeah, it was really I think, the Bainbridge Islanders asked to be transferred to Minidoka when they heard that Minidoka was constructed, and that's where the Seattle families were taken. And many had friends in Seattle and relatives in Seattle, and so that was okayed. And I think they thought it's in Idaho. It's in the Pacific Northwest. Maybe it's more like the climate here, but it was that there were in all 10 of these American concentration camps, and they were all in the exact same kind of climate and place, exactly the same. And they were all originally part of the Native American land originally. And so I think there was some, the Native Americans felt put upon because the government took over parts of their property to make these camps. And you think about it, for the government to build 10 prisons really to house thousands of people in each one, that's pretty remarkable that they were able to do that.
Well, and it's injustice on top of injustice.
Yes, it really. It's amazing. And sometimes, the United States thinks they're so holier than thou, and they're giving, sort of lecturing other countries when they themselves have done some terrible things, but then that one thing that the United States have done, they fessed up and admitted that they've done something wrong. Finally. Well, it took them a long time, but they do admit that, but they can't, but see, government is made up of people and people are people and we all make mistakes. None of us are perfect and so.
We're so darn human.
That's what it is. Oh, and that's the other thing. I like to tell this story. I have a friend whose husband passed away and she's of Norwegian descent. She was my classmate in college. And I went to his memorial service. And at his eulogy, I learned that he's Caucasian, but I learned that when he fills out these forms when it comes to race, he makes his own form. He makes his own category. He writes human and he makes a little square and makes an X there. And I thought, what a good idea.
I think there was,
Yeah.
Reed?
Yeah, I was a sophomore, but they were in high school when they came back to school. And I remember it well, and they settled in well, we thought anyway, because we even seemed like they hadn't been gone by the time they came back. And some of my friends who had been in sixth grade with were in a sophomore or junior in high school. And we started out, the football team started playing and Roy Seco was on the team. Yeah, we thought it was wonderful. And I don't know how they felt when they came back into school. Did you make a comment about that?
Yeah, how was that coming back to school, do you think, for different people?
Well, my mother, when we're going to go away, she said, tomorrow we're going to go to Seattle, taking the ferry, and it's going to be like a vacation. And I remember not being able to sleep the night before because I was so excited about going to Seattle on the ferry. But anyway, it was as if we were gone on vacation. It was 3.5 years, but then people didn't move away back then. And so when I came back, it was the same, that my classmates were the same. Nobody had moved away. And I don't remember any untoward incident coming home. And it was as if we weren't just gone. We kind of picked up. My friends were my friends. And I think many of us were elected to office. My sister became a song leader.
Do you think part of that was because of the newspaper, the Bainbridge Review, that had letters from camp and talked
Right.
about who got married and who had a baby?
Walt and Lily Wood were pretty significant in how the community responded. Because you think about it, they went against the norm. It took bravery, I think, which they deny and don't they say it wasn't bravery. We were just doing what was right because it was unconstitutional. But it took bravery because you think about wartime and people are afraid and then went against the norm saying these are people should not be sent away. But the other thing they did was they had a high school senior who was working for them after school, and he happened to be of Japanese descent. And they brought Paul into their office and said, Paul, we're giving you a promotion. You don't have to sweep floors where you're going, but we want you to be our star reporter. So when you get to the camps, we want you to write to us and tell us what's happening to our families. And so Paul did that. He wrote, because people got married, people had babies, people passed away, and there were baseball teams, and he wrote about that. And he sent it in to the Bainbridge Review, to Woodward's, and they published all that. And so the people in the community knew what was happening to the families while they were in the camps. And then the people in the camps got copies of the Bainbridge Review, so they knew what was happening here. And so that was highly unusual. And he also editorialized that when you come home, even the people who are incarcerated didn't even know if they would even be able to come home. But the Woodwards stressed that they would come home. And so that's another reason why I think we were welcomed back. And people looked after property. It wasn't just the Filipinos who looked after property. There were Caucasian neighbors who took looked after property. I think Mr. Myers allowed people to buy, he sold insurance to them when they returned. I think the Anderson hardware people paid the Ruiz property tax. I mean,
Yeah.
So
So
I'd
that's
like to-
community again, isn't
It's
it?
community again, and so it made a wonderful, big difference completely, and so I can't stress it enough.
I understand there were many of the men in the camps from the Japanese population who joined the army.
Yes, there were.
So quite a few men who had been in camps joined the army.
Well, some were already into service even before the war started. There were, and then quite a few were in the army. Our and no Cora were in the army. The Cora Farm, which is now Middle near Golf Course. They were both in the armed services. And in fact, Art Cora was wounded while he was there. And his wife Flo told me that Art would have lost his arm, except that when he went to the hospital, they were testing a new medication, and it was penicillin.
Oh, yeah.
It was brand new, and they asked if he wouldn't mind being
A guinea pig?
the guinea pig for this new antibiotic. And so she said penicillin saved his injured arm.
Yeah, probably right.
So there's all these stories out there.
I think I heard you speak last year at the site, and you were talking about going to Seattle. And I was wondering if you're starting to talk about that just now, and the different reception you had over there when you were wanting to buy shoes and.
So some of the times the reception in Seattle was different to what it was here.
Well, I didn't even think about it until my mother said, Lily, tomorrow we're going to go to Seattle to buy your school shoes. And I was so excited. And so we walked on the ferry and walked to Bon Marché, which was now Macy's, but it was the Bon Marché. We went to the shoe department and we waited and sat and waited, and no one waited on us. And I saw other people come in and try on shoes and leave with new shoes. Mama said, oh, I think they're too busy. Let's try JCPenney's, because at that time JCPenney's was downtown in Seattle. And so we walked to JCPenney's, and the same exact thing happened there. Nobody waited on us. And Mama said, oh, I'm sorry, Lily, they're too busy too. And I was pretty skeptical because I saw the same thing. I mean, I saw people come in and try shoes on, but I obeyed Mama, and I was really disappointed because that was the first time I was going to be able to pick out my shoes, because before I was getting shoes out of the Sears Roebuck catalog. And so then we're going empty-handed, walking back to the ferry, and this Caucasian man came up behind us, and I'm short and Mama's even shorter. And he said, he came up behind us and said, why don't you go back where you came from, you blankety blank Japs? I'm turning around to tell him, I'm not a Jap, I'm not. But Mama grabbed my arm and said, do not talk to him, just ignore him, keep walking. And so that was the first time that I thought, and I realized that, and so then I wanted to do my darndest to prove I was not a Jap. And so then I, at home, we ate white rice. We used to gather seaweed and dry it and eat seaweed. And we had white rice almost every day. And my father and uncle would hunt for octopus, and we ate octopus. We ate raw fish. And I'd be damned if I was going to tell anybody I ate any of that stuff. And lo and behold, one day when I went upstairs on the ferry in the deli, there was sushi you could buy.
And no canned spinach. And no canned spinach, right?
Right.
I think we're gonna have to close off the Zoom call anyway, so if you want to say a little something, then we'll, then people can stand up and ask questions.
Yeah, I hope you will take some time to look at these beautiful storyboards and pictures and images. And I hope all of you will take somebody with you when you go to the Exclusion Memorial. Take your visitors, take your family, take kids. especially because passing on the stories is really important. And, we're all part of the legacy in some ways.
Well, as Ellen said, it's needle to eye only, let it not happen again. That's
Right.
the main thing. And so that's one of the things my brother, who really was instrumental in getting all this off the ground, and he would do the tours usually. And he always pointed out that this memorial was not built to place blame or shame or guilt. That was not the purpose of this at all. The purpose was to show community and to make sure it does not happen again.
Right.